Hey there, bibliophiles and those raising bibliophiles. The goal here at Holding Steadfast is to provide you, parents, with great information about books that your children can read, because I know exactly how difficult it is. Whether you're trying to online shop, you're at a cool used bookstore, or you're shopping online, or actually in a bookstore, or even if you're at the library, it's really hard to make sure that you've got good books for your children to read. And so the goal here is to make that aspect of your day a little bit easier. And hopefully the reviews that I provide are great places for you to get some feedback and get some ideas of great books for your children to read. So today's book review is from a Christian author, and it is the Kingdom series. And today's going to be sort of a double feature of two of the books. It's a 6-book series, so I'm going to do 2 books this time. The next time you'll have 2, and then hopefully the last 2. And so the Kingdom series, the first book is Kingdom Dawn, and it's an allegorical tale of many of the Old Testament biblical stories. The book's structured as a frame novel, so the opening and closing, you have Sir Cedric of Chessington, and he's sort of telling you the story that's taking place in between those opening and closing chapters. The main character in book 1 is Lenade, and the main character is a mentor later of Cedric. So as you're starting into the story, you're not really sure what the connection is between these two, but as you go about, you eventually have that information revealed to you. The other thing that's really cool is that the author is very intentional in that he's trying to create an allegorical story, and Lenade is Daniel spelled backwards, so I'm sure that is not, just a coincidence. But many of the other characters, he gives notes and information later on about the connection that each of those have to biblical characters within the story. So for book number 1, the tale opens with Lenade and his father, and they are sword fighting, and his dad has been training him for many years in swordsmanship and very diligently been instructing him to follow the king and the king's ways. And so his dad has been very dutiful in conveying all of that stuff to him. And unfortunately, one day while Lenade is out and he is trying to hunt, he comes across some nefarious soldiers that he discovers later are known to be servants of the Dark Knight. And to his horror, he returns home, and his father's has been mortally wounded by one of these knights. And in the opening part of the story, you'll find that there's another character that's introduced. Her name is Tess, and so his father sort of takes her in and adopts her. And so Lenade is really worried because he needs to also save, the house is on fire, so he needs to save her, but his dad is also dying, and he doesn't want to miss his father's dying moments. Fortunately, he's able to do both. He saves Lenade, and he also is able to kind of get that last message from his father. There is another character, Gabrick, and he's also a servant of the king, and he has been sort of blacksmithing this magnificent sword. And it is at this moment, after Lenade's father dies, that Gabrick gives that sword to Lenade and basically charges him with a task. So one of the tasks is that he has to go back into town, and he needs to warn the people that the Vector Deluge is coming. Now, of course, the people don't listen to him. His calls and his warnings are pretty much unanswered. And he and Tess flee to the mountains. And as they're fleeing, they can hear the cries of the people below. Lenade and Tess wander the mountains for some time before making it to a village, at which time Lenade is soon sold into slavery, and it really isn't long before Tess is also sold into slavery, so there is some joy in the fact that they're reunited, but they are both slaves. And so you can start to see some of the connections or the trends to biblical stories in that. King Pharos has been collecting slaves, and he's trying to grow his castle and his kingdom. During this time, Lenade rises in stature also, and so he also falls. And at that point, when he is sort of considered an outcast again and they don't want him around, they take him basically out to the desert to die. And so they strap him down and basically are leaving him for the Moshi beast to eat him. However, the king does come to his aid, heals him, and then he is being trained in swordsmanship by the king, who does eventually commission him to go and free his people from King Pharos. And that is pretty much where the story ends in book 1. So if you're familiar with Old Testament stories, you're going to see a lot of those connections and parallels. The author does include questions for each of the chapters in the back of the book. You'll also notice that these books aren't very long. So a lot has been happening and covered, and it all happens very, very quickly in the story. So it is a very fast-paced story, and you get a lot of you get enough detail, enough action to keep the readers interested, and they're not lost, but it is going to keep the readers going. And I think that kind of sets up this story to be really great for young readers who are maybe reading on their own for the first time, or are still developing some of those early reading skills. And then you're going to see also that if you have students who are reluctant readers, that they may find this story appealing. My son is a strong reader, and he absolutely loved the stories, and mainly because of the knights and all of that kind of stuff. He really enjoys those medieval kind of stories, and that's sort of how this story comes across. Book number 2 is Kingdom's Hope. And so book number 2 picks up exactly where book number 1 left off. And so Lynette is returning to King Pharos, and he is demanding for the release of the king's people. King Pharos refuses to let the people go, and Lynette challenges him to a duel. But they continue to have this duel daily until essentially there's a winner or somebody gives up. After successive days of fighting, King Pharos, his weariness and his anger kind of get the best of him. So when he is fighting Lynette, unfortunately, he actually tragically kills his own son. His son was trying to come up and fight him and be like, Dad, I'm going to help you, finally destroy this guy. And it's a swift moment and time, and King Pharos kills his own son. So upon the death of his son, he does release the people. But as you can imagine, that doesn't last long. Once all of the anger and the stuff starts to pour in, he is soon after all of the king's people that he has let go. And it's with the help of Audric and Quinn and Tess that Lynette is able to really get the people to safety as the army and forces of King Pharos are on their way to destroy them. The people are able to make it into the Scourge, and basically the goal is to lead them out and to lead them to the land of Chessington, which is, if you remember from the very beginning, this is a frame novel in each of the series. So Cedric of Chessington is the one who's sort of narrating a lot of the story to the readers. And so they do get to this time of Chessington. They eventually make it. It's the golden years, time of prosperity, all these wonderful things, but the people eventually want a king over them. And so Lynette is the obvious choice, but he very much refuses. And so they do settle on not necessarily a king, because they don't want to inadvertently, not follow the king of Arathia, of the world, but they do set up like a lord over them. Unfortunately, Quinn takes a wife that he probably shouldn't, and she leads him into all kinds of trouble. And eventually, the people of Chessington are ending up being taken captive by the Kessons. And the Kessons, the king of the Kessons, Kurgan, he is fairly civil with the people, even though he does enslave them. He does eventually demand that all of them are going to bow down to him, and Lynette and some of the other characters, Tess and Audric, they of course refuse. And so the king's like, okay, off with them and put them in, the pit of the Dragomoths, who are these creatures who will eat them, and destroy them. And so while they are thrown into this pit, a man on a white horse appears and he saves them. And soon, then another army arises, and Kurgan and the Kessons are defeated, and the king's people are once again freed from bondage. Lynette returns to Chessington at this point to begin to piece back their lives and to reestablish the devotion to the king and the code. And so that's sort of a lot of that stuff taking place there at the end. It isn't long, though. Lynette does have a brother who comes, and he wants to destroy the Chessington. So they're in a fierce battle of all the things going on. And the story sort of ends there with Cedric, the narrator, kind of relaying to the reader where the story comes from. And book 3 is going to pick up with some of that same stuff. Again, you continue to have those allegorical trends that you're going to see in the book. And just like with book 1, Chuck Black leaves a lot of information in the back for readers, also a note, and seeing like what his expectations were and what he was using. If you're looking for a great family read, I do think that this series would be a great family read, something nighttime. You could probably do a chapter a night. You have the questions you could reference, something like that. But if you're looking for a family book that you want to read with your young ones, this would certainly be a book that is intriguing and brings up good themes and ideas to explore with your children.